Thank you, James, and thank you to you and KTN for inviting me today. I'm very happy to be here. So I'm gonna share my screen. Just let me know if you can see my presentation.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for attending this presentation. So today, as James was introducing, I'm going to talk to you about regenerative indoor environments, and specifically, I want to focus on how can we characterize and evaluate them. So just a very quick overview of my next slides. So I will start talking to you about the cost restore action from the start of the action, the premises, to the challenges that we wanted to face and the objectives of the action. And then I will move to the focus of this presentation, so the actual creation of regenerative indoor environments, addressing what it is, a regenerative indoor environment, how do we characterize it, but also how then we can evaluate a regenerative indoor environment. And finally, I will conclude my presentation with, let's say, a couple of inputs to you, for you to think about. So one is how can we account for users' specificities in the indoor environments? And why is it so important to acknowledge also the co-benefits coming from high designed buildings? So the cost to restore action, COST is the longest running pan-European framework supporting transnational cooperation among researchers, engineers and scholars across Europe. Coming to cost restore, restore stands for rethink sustainability towards a regenerative economy. Cost restore concluded in 2021, and it lasted for 4 years of activity. And during these 4 years, it was coordinated by ERAC Research, which is a research institute based in the north of Italy. Cost Restore saw 150 researchers and industry representatives involved in the action, who were scattered across 40 countries in Europe. So the strength of the Cost Restore action was actually multidisciplinary. I really don't want you to read anything from this plot, but what I really want you to look at is the legend, let's say, of this plot. Because as you can see, all the researchers and industry representatives that were involved in the action had really a wide range of skills and multiple disciplines they were involved in, from of course, architecture, engineering, to agricultural economics, environmental policies, of course, energy modeling, energy systems, but also industrial ecology, landscape management, life cycle assessment, sustainable design, aspects related to construction, transportation, urban planning. So as you can see, the strength of the team of the cost restore action was really this broad range of disciplines. So the cost restore action started from the premise that sustainable buildings and facilities are really critical and crucial to a future that is socially just, ecologically restorative, culturally rich, and economically viable within the climate change context. So as you can see from this premise, the target of the cost restore action was not merely focusing on the built environment, just only on the architectural and engineering part, but also addressing those aspects related to the social justice, the ecological part, and also the cultural part of people using buildings, but also of the ecosystem surrounding the buildings. So according to the cost restore action, sustainability in buildings, as it's understood today, is yet an inadequate measure for current and future architectural design challenges, because sustainability aims actually no higher than trying to make buildings less bad. Actually, building on current European standards, the restorative sustainability approaches that wanted to raise aspirations in buildings and deliver restorative outcomes. So for the cost to restore action, the built environment sector has no longer the luxury of being just incrementally less bad, but, and with a certain urgency, the built environment needs to adopt a net positive, restorative sustainability thinking to incrementally do more good. So at this point, for buildings, it's not just a matter of doing less bad to the ecosystems, but actually do something good for the ecosystems. So the Restore Cost Action promoted this paradigm shift towards restorative sustainability, both for new and existing buildings and space design across Europe. The action aimed at addressing this complexity of aspects with a combination of both quantitative and qualitative thinking. The Restore Action proposes to expand on a narrow focus on building energy performance, mitigation strategies, and limiting environmental aspects that, don't get me wrong, are of course very important, but we wanted to move towards a broader framework that regenerates places and enriches people, ecology, culture, and climate at the core of design, construction, but also during the operation of the buildings. We wanted to this action to put a particular emphasis on concepts such as health, biophilia, and also the links of the built environment to the natural ecosystems. So as you can see in this image, we wanted to move from merely reducing the impact, doing business as usual with buildings, moving towards a sustainable point of balance, towards a more restorative and regenerative approach, where buildings do positive good. So it's not just reducing the impact now, but it's doing positive good with buildings. Just to be a little bit more clear what the definitions here. So with sustainable, which here was, let's say, the balance point, we mean just limiting the impact. So it's the balance point where we give back as much as we take. Then we move to the restorative approach, which means restoring social and ecological systems to a healthy state. And then we want to take a step forward, a step more, towards a regenerative approach, where we want to enable social and ecological systems to maintain a healthy state and to co-evolve together. So we move from limiting the impact to actually enabling a co-evolution of the systems. In the last decades, as we all probably are aware of, green buildings have actually spread widely, offering an environmental performance higher than the average buildings. And also green indoors are currently relatively common, also thanks to building certifications tools that are often characterized by a set of key performance indicators. However, if we look at those certifications and standards, the focus is still predominantly on energy efficiency, resource conservation, and reduced carbon footprints. Of course, they are important. They are like the basics, but we need a more holistic perspective. So we need to address this intricate interplay between the ecosystems, biodiversity, and also the multifaceted aspects of human health. So at this point, buildings need to go beyond the mere reduction of their environmental impacts and should aim to do positive environmental benefits. So maybe it's a little bit more clear from this plot. So we want to move, as I said, from reducing the impact to do a positive impact. So we need to move from the conventional practice where buildings just aim at achieving minimum standards. We can move to have a green performance building where we have a performance improvement also according to sustainability ratings. Then we reach the point of sustainable design towards net zero carbon neutral buildings. And then we jump on the other side of the wall, let's say. We reach a restorative design where we want to go back to pre-development environmental conditions, to the final extent of a regenerative design where human and natural systems actively co-evolve together. Get to the crucial point. What is a regenerative indoor environment? In the cost restore action, we actually referred to a regenerative indoor environment as an approach that aims to create a new set of relationships that reinforce the state of human health and natural ecosystems, utilizing appropriate construction and technology targeted to indoor environments. So the focus, it's not only just the energy performance of the building, but now the focus is also indoor environment, the human health. The three pillars of a regenerative design are the ecological gain, so to design indoor spaces so that nature is connected with them and they can co-evolve together. The second pillar is the salutogenesis. Salutogenesis is a term coordinated by Aaron Antonovsky in 1979. So, I mean, we're going back in time. It's nothing new, let's say. And it means generation of health. So making well-being part of the regenerative paradigm, rather than just targeting the absence of ill health. So now the new target is health-promoting environments. And the last one is biophilia. So highlighting this innate human relationship with nature with the aim to continue the individual's connection with nature in the environments where we live. We know that we live and work most of the time inside in indoor environments, and we kind of lost this relationship with nature. But with the regenerative indoor environments, we want to go back to that relationship. So in this current historical and spatial realm of sustainable design, indoor environments have focused on achieving baseline levels of comfort and health. So far they have operated on a paradigm of doing less harm. But now we want to think about indoor spaces as they are some ecosystems. We need to look back to the outdoor environment, to nature, to set a goal for good practice. And we shall create indoor environments that consume less energy, but at the same time enhance the indoor environmental quality for the people who live and work inside the buildings. This is the scope of a regenerative indoor environment. So thinking about regenerative indoor environments, today I wanted to focus on two main questions. First of all, what characterizes a regenerative indoor environment? And secondly, what methods or approaches are crucial for its evaluation? So let's start from the first one. So to enhance the occupants' comfort and well-being, it is pivotal to implement a holistic approach, as I said, that considers multiple aspects connected with the human building coexistence and interactions. To do so, the first thing to do is to characterize the environment we are dealing with and the type of building we are looking at. So today I'm bringing to you this example, this methodological framework that was built focusing on office buildings. So once we know the building typology, in this case, office buildings, the second step to do is knowing the actual function of the building and the different types of activities that we need to perform inside that building. Another key aspect is knowing the occupant's target, because of course, in different buildings, we could have a different type of occupants, and sometimes we could have also very sensible type of occupants. Let's think about schools, for example, or like care facilities for elders. In that case, we would have a very specific typology of occupants. And from this information, we can set the performance targets that we want to achieve in that indoor environment. So Here are the steps that we follow to build this framework. First of all, the building characterization. Secondly, the characterization of the indoor environment. Then we looked at the current state of the art regarding the indoor environment. Then we moved to the identification of some regenerative KPIs, and then we built some thresholds for those regenerative KPIs. So the building characterization was actually probably the most easy part. As I said, this example is built on office buildings, which, as we know, are buildings used for general office space, professional office, or administrative office, and the main targets in office is usually adults. In an office building, if we want to characterize the indoor environment, we need to look at the main affected tasks that can be related to the indoor environment. So, for example, in an office building, the indoor environment could affect the productivity and attention of people, but also the cognitive activities and the processing of information. There is a lot of literature about this, but also very specific tasks like the writing capability, the desk and screen reading, the visual, but also the sound privacy within an office. Health-related absenteeism, for example, and ills related to the sick building syndrome, but also, and this sometimes it's a little bit neglected, also the psychological attitudes and the motivation of the workers. All these affected tasks are related, of course, to some specific environmental aspects, from indoor air quality to the hygrothermal environment, the visual and acoustic environment, and last but not least, the human nature environment. Each environmental aspect, we can look at more specific sub-aspects, let's say. So, for example, for indoor air quality, there is the ventilation, the outdoor and indoor ventilation, the presence of chemical or natural contaminants, the concentration of pollutants, or the presence of odors. For the agrothermal environment, there is temperature, there is humidity, but there are also local discomfort issues. For the regional environment, there is to address the natural lighting, but also the artificial lighting, issues like glare, color rendering. For the acoustic environment, we could look at the background noise level, but also to sound absorption and reflection, to reverberation issues, and to acoustic insulation for sound privacy. And for the human nature environment, we could look at, for example, the external view from the office, the right to light of people using the building, biophilia, and access to nature. As you can see, we also put the occupant satisfaction for each of these environmental aspects, because our aim was not only to look at parameters that can be objectively monitored, but also to look at the feedback of the users. Because for us it was really important to involve the occupants in the evaluation of the indoor environment. At this point, we wanted to look at the current state of the art. So we looked at the main current literature sources and standards addressing these different environmental aspects. And this part was funny, a little bit of a mess, because as you can see also from this slide, there are really a lot of standards and guidelines concerning these different environmental aspects. So just if we look at indoor air quality, there is the standard from the APA, there is the standard from WHO, there's the NIOSH, OSHA, the standards from ASHRAE, European standards, and also some more, let's say, innovative and disruptive guidelines like the Well-Building Standard and the Living Building Challenge. We did the same literature search for each environmental aspect. So also for the agrothermal environment, we looked back at the different standards concerning the hydrothermal part, like ASHRAE, but also European standards. We did the same for the visual environment, as you can see from the slide. We did the same for the acoustic environment. And finally, for the human nature environment. Of course, for this last aspect, I mean, we had to look just to the more innovative standards, because unfortunately, it's something that it's really not yet standardized into guidelines or European standards or directives. So we pretty soon realized that there were really a lot of different sources, guidelines, and standards addressing these environmental aspects. And our question was, how can professionals navigate into all these standards and guidelines? Even because if you look at them, and then I will give you a reference to the booklet where we actually put all the different thresholds coming from these standards. The fact is that also the thresholds for the same KPI sometimes are different from one standard to another. So the question at this point was, how can we navigate with all the available reference? So what we did here was taking all these actual conventional parameters and trying to take from this big cauldron of indexes and thresholds some parameters, some KPIs to be addressed targeting a regenerative indoor environment. So at this point, we identified some KPIs with this aim in mind of achieving almost 10 KPIs for the overall evaluation of the indoor environment. So for the indoor air quality, we looked at contaminants and the relationship with the outdoor air. For the agrothermal environment, of course, we looked at temperature, humidity, and airspeed. For the visual environment, we looked at daylight and the circadian rhythms. For the acoustic environment, to the background noise level, and for the human nature environment, to the right to light and the connectivity to nature. So these for us were the important sub-aspects that we wanted to take into consideration for the KPIs identification. Which were the goals? First of all, we wanted to outline several key performance indicators that relate to the design of indoor spaces and that will support a radical shift from merely limiting health-related impacts to a series of newer regenerative performances. KPIs, in our mind, would fully embrace the meanings of health generation and well-being, facilitating the likely effects and prospects for development of indoor design, construction, and technologies. And they would demonstrably improve inhabitants' health and not just seek to reduce ill health. So for each sub-aspect at this point, we identified a specific key performance indicator. So among the contaminants, we chose to look at the formaldehyde, which is this non-color and non-odor gas that is present inside buildings also due to the furnitures. And it's very hazardous for health, for respiratory issues, also leading to cancer sometimes. We wanted to look at the relationship to the outdoor air, taking into consideration the presence of particulate matters, both PM2.5 and PM10. And of course, we wanted to take into consideration also the satisfaction of people, so the percentage of people satisfied towards indoor air quality. For the part about temperature, humidity, and airspeed, we looked at the different standards and we recommended the implementation of the standard ASHRAE standard 55 for the evaluation of the thermal environment. For the daylight, we promoted the useful daylight luminance KPI, which refers to the amount of daylight that is useful for the occupants, without causing glare or disrupting the visual environment. If we are able in an indoor environment to achieve a good useful daylight luminance, we actually can avoid to use electric light for most of the day. For the circadian rhythms, we promoted the equivalent melanopic lux, which is an index that quantifies how light can impact human health at a physiological level, and especially for the circadian rhythms. For the background noise level, we adopted the noise criteria. For the light to light, we adopted the percentage of windows access to light. And for the conductivity to nature, the biophilic design. If we look at the key performance indicators, as you can see, there are some indicators that can be addressed by means of an objective monitoring, so that can demonstrably improve the inhabitants' health and that we can actually monitor inside the environment. But then there are also the percentage of satisfied people for each environmental area. This is because we really think that the subjective feedback is important, and this approach wants to put at the center occupants and their well-being. So it's really important to have the feedback of the users on how much satisfied they are with the indoor environment. At this point, for each key performance indicator, we adopted a regenerative value. So here you can see the different regenerative values that we adopted for each KPIs. Of course, to identify those thresholds, we looked at the main references and standards in literature. And among all that cauldron of different thresholds and standards, we targeted the standards that had the most, let's say, disruptive and high-level threshold for that KPI. So at the end, we reached our framework for the office buildings. This is like a summary table where we have each environmental aspect that we decided to take into consideration, each sub-aspect that we addressed. So for example, for air quality environment, contaminants, outdoor and indoor air, for the hydrothermal environment, as we saw before, temperature, humidity, and airspeed, visual environment, daylight and circadian rhythms, and so far so on. For each of them, we identified one KPI, and for each KPI, we identified the most regenerative values that can be achieved within the environment. So at this point, we have the KPIs, we have the thresholds, and the question is what methods and approaches can be used for the evaluation of an indoor environment. So maybe a lot of you are already familiar with the post-occupancy evaluations, or maybe you're not. Post-occupancy evaluations are some structured and repeatable approaches to assess the performance of a building after its occupation. And this is key because we want to evaluate the building, not just, let's say, on paper, on the design phase, but we want to actually evaluate the operational performance of the buildings. And post-occupancy evaluations are able to deliver to designers, but also building owners and managers, very crucial information for a constant verification and improvement of the building. Unfortunately, a substantial limitation of post-occupancy evaluations is that up to today, even though some certifications like the WELL Building Standard now are including post-occupancy evaluations in their certification, unfortunately, they usually are a prerogative of the research and academic world, and not very often post-occupancy evaluations are performed in real practices. Another limitation of post-occupancy evaluations is that there are very numerous examples in literature about post-occupancy evaluations, but consistent and robust methodologies are often hard to find, in the sense that the post-occupancy evaluations are usually performed, let's say, according to who is performing the post-occupancy evaluation. And still they are not like standardized in any standard or guidelines. So there are a lot of different approaches to address post-occupancy evaluations. Starting from the different environmental aspects that we would like to assess in the indoor environment, we can have two different approaches in post-occupancy evaluation. So the first approach is the single aspects approach. So we can focus at just one indoor environmental quality area at a time. So for example, I just focus on indoor air quality, or I just focus on the agrothermal environment, one at a time separately. The other approach is actually to have a comprehensive approach. So the comprehensive approach foresees the simultaneous assessment of all indoor environmental quality areas, and it's a more complete and overall holistic approach to address the performance of the indoor environment. The post-occupancy evaluations also can have two different methodologies. One is the subjective one, with the administration of response surveys questionnaires to the occupants. So I administer to the users a questionnaires, and they can give us their response about their preference and their satisfaction of the indoor environment. The other approach is the objective approach, where we can perform short or long-term monitoring campaigns of the indoor environmental parameters. The best practice for the post-occupancy evaluation actually is the integration of both these two approaches. As we saw before for the KPIs, for example, we wanted to identify some KPIs that could be objectively monitored through some monitoring campaigns. But we also put as a KPIs the percentage of people satisfied with the indoor environment. So the best approach is to merge together these KPIs, the objective ones and the subjective ones. This is because the subjective responses are essential to integrate the assumptions made on objective measurements that cannot ultimately return the multifaceted aspects related to the stochastic nature of the human subjects. Just to, in a few words, let's say the objective measurements can give us the numbers, but cannot really give us the real sensation and the real perception, but also the needs and the preferences of the users. So it's always a best practice, and it's very important to combine these two different approaches. The survey questionnaires can be administered and performed in different ways. We can have a transversal approach where we use to administer the survey to many different individuals. The survey is usually very short, about 15 minutes, and it consists of standardized evaluation scales. It addresses a specific point in time. So the evaluation in this case is about a specific point in time, and it's usually used for benchmarking different buildings. Then we can have a longitudinal approach where we actually survey a small recurring sample. And this helps to monitor the evolution of indoor environmental quality over time. So it's just not in a specific point in time, we can repeat it over time. Also in this case, we have standardized evaluation scales. And it's important because with this approach, we can actually look at changes at the individual level for subjects. And it can also be useful, since we have a small sample, to study cause-effect patterns in the indoor environment. The last one, which is a very specific approach, is the point-in-time approach. The point-in-time approach is used to identify very specific issues in the indoor environment, for example, discomfort issues or locally discomfort issues in an entire building. It's performed with a small sample. It foresees the integration of survey questionnaires and monitoring. So at the time where we are administering the service to users, we can also perform some monitoring campaigns with the sensors and instruments. The risk is that this type of approach is very demanding because, of course, you also have to bring with you some monitoring sensors and some equipment, and you have to install sensors in different places of the building. So for these reasons, usually this approach is restricted in time and space because it's very resource consuming. Post-occupancy evaluations are very helpful to overcome what is called the performance gap. In fact, a building on the paper or in the simulation, let's say, could work perfectly, but actually evaluating the performance of the building post-occupancy, so where the building is actually operating, and asking to the users which is their sensation, their preferences, and their feedback on the building, it's totally another thing. And this can help, post-occupancy evaluation can help both for listening to the users, but also then to integrate their needs and their preferences, but also to have a contact with the users and, let's say, educate them, train them towards the use of the building. So post-occupancy evaluation can really be, the link between the building itself and the people who are using the building. Because we do not have to forget that the buildings at the end of the day are for the building who are living inside them. Just a little focus on the users and on how to address all the specificities coming from the different users. The current notion of comfort, in fact, if we look at standards and guidelines, actually tend to create a perfectly static environment. But actually, we need to remember that users, for their intrinsic nature, are all different. I can have a completely different sensation from another person, and we could be in the same room. Post-occupancy evaluation can in fact help us also to grasp and to gather also what I call these diversity driving factors. In fact, subjects through post-occupancy evaluations express their level of satisfaction with the surrounding environment, but there are a lot of factors that can impact their mind state or their sensation. Can be cultural factors, social factors, but also technological factors, economic factors, and so far so on. To address all these factors, we need to have a mindset very multidisciplinary, very multidimensional, because comfort is a very complex notion. And it's just not about like architecture and engineering, but it's also about social sciences, physiology, psychology, anthropology, because of course, our body and our mindset is affected by a lot of contextual factors. As I said, it's influenced by contextual factors and contextual boundaries, and so indoor environments can actually be richer experiences than merely the neutrality that we are seeking with standards and guidelines. So the user in the indoor environment as one main driver, it's achieving services and comfort. But actually the path through comfort, it's very complex. It's not just a straight line. The sensation and the perception of a user within the building is affected by its expectation and its adaptation in the building. And expectation and adaptation are aspects that are deeply grounded in users' long-term history, and their dynamics are affected by a multiplicity of factors related to different disciplines and sciences. Can be diversity driving factors, but also contextual factors related to, for example, their long-term climatic history. So let's think about two people in the same room. One of them comes from the south of Italy, and one of them comes from Sweden. Of course, these two people are affected by their long-term climatic history, in sensing and in their perception of the building, but also from their cultural also history. So post-occupancy evaluations, so asking to the users about themselves, can also help us to address and to consider these aspects. And eventually, considering these aspects can enable a shift of paradigm in the design of buildings to account for users' diversities and take a step aside from the ideal notion of comfort and to re-enable the concept of flexibility and transience within buildings. The last part of my presentation, it's about why it is so important to understand the co-benefits derived from high-level designed buildings. As I said multiple times today, the focus when we talk about buildings is often only on the direct effects, energy savings, costs, and the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. That is perfect, but we need to look at also the indirect effects, or so-called co-benefits, or multiple benefits. There are a lot of terms in literature. And these are always neglected. Because they are difficult to quantify. And what is difficult to quantify is difficult to monetize. And unfortunately, we all know that we live in a world where if something is not easy to monetize, sometimes it does not exist. But also because it's difficult to infuse this legacy, this importance of the co-benefits at different stakeholders level. So with the term indirect benefits, indirect effects, co-benefits, we address the indirect effects resulting from the implementation of solution sets, technologies, and systems, besides or as a consequence of the achieved direct effects, due to a building renovation or to a high-level design of buildings. So we implemented the building-specific technologies and solution set. We achieve an improved energy and indoor environmental quality performance. Of course, implementing some specific technologies can bring additional costs in the investment, but it's important to consider that this will bring also some co-benefits and indirect effects. These indirect effects can target different levels of economy and society. So, for example, for the household level, for the building owner or the user, we are talking about, for example, increased user comfort, fewer problems with the building physics, or also maybe an improved aesthetics of the building. And for the society community level, we mean health benefits, job creation, energy security, impact on climate change. If we look at the indirect effects coming from high-level designed buildings, we identified some main areas concerning these indirect effects. This can be related to the user and to his well-being, but can be also economic effects, environmental effects, and social effects. Here, I just give you an example, but then I will put for you the reference if you're interested in this topic. So, for example, if we look at the indirect effects at the household level, of course, we see thermal comfort, acoustic comfort, visual comfort, and indoor air quality. Or, for example, if we look at the indirect effects at the community level, we can have a reduction of the atmospheric pollution, a reduction of the demolition waste, an enhancement of the environmental protection, but also a reduction, and this is key, of mortality, morbidity, and hospitalization, energy security for people, and security to access energy. So also in terms of energy poverty. It is very important to understand and make stakeholders understand the importance of these co-benefits related to, for example, the improvement on indoor environmental conditions and health. Here, just for your reference, I just put a few examples of studies that have actually quantified the benefits coming from an improvement in indoor environmental quality. For example, in this work, they quantified health benefits from improved indoor climate between 42 and 88 million euros per year. In these other studies, there is an actual quantification of the reduced respiratory illness, allergies and asthma, sick building syndrome symptoms, and this study was actually performed on office buildings. So really looking at the benefits that can come also from the employer if his employers work in a good indoor environmental quality condition. And here also another study that quantified the reduced sick leaves per year compared to an additional investment and the profit over 30 years for that investment. This part about the co-benefits and their quantification is actually, let's say, a branch in research that is not yet so paved. There are few studies that are looking at the quantification of the co-benefits. More research is of course needed and also more communication on these co-benefits, both for the occupants of the buildings, but also for the overall society. And with this, I conclude my presentation. So I hope to have given you a little bit an overall overview of what we did in the cost restoration and what also could be future outlooks for research in these topics. So just to sum up, as we said today, we can no longer be merely just sustainable, but with our buildings, we did to do more good. KPIs and thresholds today should aim at regenerative indoor environments. Post-occupancy evaluations are pivotal to evaluate indoor environments, but also to account for the users' feedbacks for the preferences and needs. Remembering that users are all different, and it is very important to understand their specific needs, their specific expectations and preferences. Last, we need really to raise awareness towards the importance of the co-benefits deriving from high-level design buildings, and not just focusing on the energy performance of the buildings. And in order to make people understanding more these co-benefits, probably we need to pass through the quantification and the monetization of these co-benefits. So here I put for you some references of what I presented today, if we want to have more insights on the presentation. And I really thank you for your patience and your attention.